Hi, Kim here at Wild Hearts and Wildflowers. And today I want to share with you, the first phase of my nonfiction November reading. I was going to try to share a weekly update, so 4 updates in total in November, but as with many other people, the very beginning of November was kind of thrown off kilter for me, in addition to the whole election debacle. There's also been the fact that I had a little fall. I tend to have those once in a while because I now have balance issues. And I managed to break a rib and sprain a wrist, but overall, I'm totally fine. Then also, the very same day that happened, one of my ducks had a freak accident. Not sure how she managed to hurt herself the way she did, but anyway, I had to bring her in and tend to her, and I didn't think she was going to make it, but now, almost a week later, it looks like she's going to pull through. But for 4 days, she, lived in my shower. Yes, she had the run of it. No one bothered her in there, that's for sure. She had the run of it, and that kept her safe, isolated, and clean. And then now she's outside again in her own little special pen, her recovery pen, and she seems to be very happy to be out there, so we're still hoping for the best in that regard. But getting back to my reading, what I've decided to do as far as updates go is do 3 updates, as in divide the month into thirds. So the 10th, the 20th, and the last day of the month, the 30th, I will give you a rundown on what I've been reading and what I think about what I've been reading. I have to say, I've been a little surprised at some of the stuff that I have read so far. So let me share with you. So originally, I had 8 titles on my nonfiction November pile of possibilities, and that has come down to 7 because I actually ended up reading one of those titles back in October. I thought maybe it would bleed into November and then I could count it, for this month. But no, I finished it at the end of October, and that was Michelle Harper's memoir, The Beauty in Breaking, which I talked about in my last video, my October reading wrap-up. So you can check back with that video if you want to hear what I thought about Michelle Harper's memoir. But that left me with only 7 titles, and, I thought, that's not enough. So I added another one to the list this past week, and that was one of Rebecca Solnit's essay collections, The Mother of All Questions. And I have really been enjoying Rebecca Solnit's writing this week, and I have expanded from reading her essays she's been posting online on The Guardian and on her website every day to also going back and rereading her essay collections. Very, very encouraging, not pie in the sky optimistic, but realistic and yet inspiring. She is just a great thinker and writer, great activist, and if you haven't read her, I highly recommend you do. And so I am reading through this collection right now, about halfway through it, and very much enjoying it. I read all of her collections as they came out, but it's just a good time to reread them. So that's what I added in place of Harper's memoir. What else did I start reading? 2 others of the titles on my list. The first one is Pathogenesis, A History of the World in 8 Plagues. So I'm about 45% of the way through the book at this point. And what do I think of it so far? Well, it is different than I thought it would be. I am liking it very much, but I thought it was going to be a lot more science focused, a lot more focused on the plagues than it is. It's actually more focused on the world history aspect. Yes, on how the plagues, directed that history in so many ways as we look back now and can understand it now. But so far anyway, in the first 4 chapters that I've read, and there are 8 chapters in all, I have found, that the history far, far outweighs the science. But still, the science is definitely there. In fact, the intro to the book is all science. It explains bacteria and viruses and what we didn't know and what we now know. So the world was formed 4.5 billion years ago, and about 1 billion years after that, bacteria showed up, as we can see in fossil records. Now, to compare that, humans, as we know them today, were not around until 300,000 or 400,000 years ago. A blip at the very end of that long timeline. But bacteria, they're the most dominant life form on Earth, and they are everywhere. And they have a huge, huge impact on Earth. Oxygenation, photosynthesis, decomposition, so many ways they make up the processes of the world. Viruses, on the other hand, unlike bacteria, are not cells. They're simply genetic material, DNA, RNA, coded in protein, and they're really nothing. In other words, they can't do anything until they insert themselves into a human cell and start replicating, making copies of themselves. Now, bacteria are microscopic, meaning we can see them under a microscope, though not with the naked eye. But viruses are so much smaller, hundreds of times smaller than bacteria. And they have therefore left no record in the fossils, at least not as we as yet can tell. But just because viruses are small doesn't mean they don't have a huge impact on us and this world. There's just so many of them. In 1 liter of seawater, there are over 100 billion virus particles. And in 1 kilogram of soil, there's about 1 trillion of them. In fact, scientists think that the total number of viruses on the Earth numbers 10 to the 31st power. That's 10 followed by 31 zeros. Still, according to this book, only 220 viruses can infect the human body. And most of these viruses are what are called bacteriophages. Phages meaning to devour. And what they do is every single day, they devour or destroy bacteria. 20 to 40% of the bacteria in the world every day and in our bodies every day. So that's a good thing. All right, that's all the science from the introduction of this book that I will inundate you with. But I will tell you that the author, Jonathan Kennedy, makes a point. The takeaway from the intro is that over the last few decades, science has expanded our knowledge of DNA so much that it has, I'll quote here, revolutionized our understanding of pathogens and the past. And that is where the main chapters of the book begin. Now, there are 8 chapters in the book, and when I first started reading it, I thought there was going to be a main plague in each of those chapters because, the history of the world in 8 plagues. But that's not what it is. It's really 8 time frames. So let me give you the chapters of the book. So chapter 1 is the Paleolithic era, chapter 2, the Neolithic, chapter 3, the Ancient, chapter 4, which is the one I'm currently on, the Medieval period, and then chapter 5, Colonial, chapter 6, Revolutionary, chapter 7, Industrial, and chapter 8, the Plagues of Poverty. So not really a time period on that last one, but more a state of being, state of race and class. Poverty. Now, once I understood the structure of the book, I was fine with it. Wasn't what I expected, but very interesting. I love history. The thing about this book is if you are not interested in the nitty-gritty details of history, then this might not be the book about plagues you want to read, because that's really what it is. And what I've decided with it, as interesting as I find it, and I do, and he tells it very well, but just in a very, very detailed way. I want to spread out my reading of it more so that I will remember it better. If I read at my normal quick pace through this book, I will forget a lot of it, I know. So I've decided to take this book more slowly and to take notes as I go, which I never do, I have to tell you. I do not take notes when I read, other than, if I'm reading for an academic purpose. But I'm not doing that right now. I'm reading for my own general enrichment and learning. So I'd like to take maybe reading 1 chapter a week and take 8 or 9 weeks to read this book rather than rushing it through in just 3 or 4 weeks. So that's what I'm going to do with this. And now I'm really looking forward to reading it, knowing I can, sort of just savor all the history as I go. Now, if I have any disappointment in the book, it's simply that I was expecting a little bit more science, a little bit more clarity on the plagues. But, maybe that's going to come in the next several chapters, because after all, the chapters I've been reading so far are so far back in history that it's amazing the author has gleaned from his research on recent scientific advances the information he has about the events in the past that were before attributed to different causes that now we know actually probably stemmed back to plagues. So that's what I think so far of Pathogenesis, A History of the World in 8 Plagues. And now, what is the second book I've been reading? Well, it's a book by Barbara Ehrenreich. I've read a lot of her other books, and I have, for the most part, really liked them. She's a top-notch writer on, current social issues, a journalistic writer. But I was surprised by something I found out about her as soon as I started reading this book, too. So she may have mentioned this in some of her previous books, but I don't recall it. Certainly not when I read her best-selling Nickel and Dimed. But right up front in this book, because it is talking about science, she lets on that she happens to be a cellular biologist. She studied and got a degree in that. Who knew? But it comes in very handy for the topic of this book. This book is called Natural Causes, and I'm going to have to look at my notes to read the subtitle because it's very long. All right, so Natural Causes, an epidemic of wellness, the certainty of dying, and killing ourselves to live longer. So I knew when I read the synopsis of this book that it was going to be something I found very interesting, well, mostly because of my age. Barbara Ehrenreich is, I think, about a decade older than me. I'm not positive on that, but she's a little older than me, and she's dealt with some things that I have not. She had breast cancer. And with her background as a scientist and her background as a journalist and a writer, I thought she's probably going to have some really insightful things to say. I was not prepared, though, for her first chapter, and I very much found myself agreeing with it, by and large. Anything that I say, by the way, when I support a writer or a particular book and I endorse it, does not mean I necessarily endorse every single word in it. That would be kind of crazy. But yes, the first 4 chapters of this book, I just found very validating, I guess I would say. As someone of my gender and my age, I have dealt with a lot of the things she discussed, and I have observed a lot of the things she discussed. The first 4 chapters of this book are entitled Midlife Revolt, Rituals of Humiliation, The Veneer of Science, and Crushing the Body. So basically, Barbara Ehrenreich talks about how we've all been fed a lot of lies, that the commercialization of medicine has taken over the country, that the drive to not age at all, the drive to live forever, as has been pushed on us by many different realms of society, Western society, is taking over most people's lives. But she breaks it down into very common scenarios that many of us have faced, from doctors talking down to us and ignoring things that are wrong with us, to the huge prevalence of unnecessary tests that we are given by doctors that really lead nowhere or lead to unnecessary surgeries. And yeah, because I have myself dealt with this personally and with one of my children, I found myself nodding along with a lot of what Ehrenreich was saying here. Now, there have been some reviews that I'm aware of that talk about her dismissal of autism diagnoses and things like that. I have only just got to the midway point of the book where that came up on one page. And I'm not yet sure if she meant it to be taken that way. One of the issues I have with this book is that it seems to be a bit disorganized. From what I can tell, these chapters were originally published as standalone articles and then combined to create this book. And therefore, there's not necessarily any kind of flow to it, and often not as much perhaps explanation as would happen if you were writing a book from scratch. There is a lot of research and evidence backing up a lot of what she says, but as a journalistic writer, she also includes a lot of firsthand experiences, a lot of interviews with people, a lot of sociological trends. So there is all that. But yes, as someone who's been diagnosed with 5 different autoimmune diseases, and then by other doctors told, no, you don't have that, maybe you have this, I don't put a lot of stock necessarily in what doctors have to say. As someone who was suggested both for myself and for one of my children that we have very serious surgeries, and yet after research and interviews with people who had such surgeries, deciding not to have them, and then within a year or two being told by other specialist doctors that I made the right choice. I definitely should not have gone ahead with those surgeries, either one of them. I realize more and more as time goes on that medicine is subjective, and that yes, both in the medical field and in the pharmaceutical field, commercialization drives a lot of it. And yes, society and people's drive to want to live longer and look younger and control the aging and the health of their bodies makes us vulnerable to the snake oil salesman, to the dream that yes, maybe we can live longer. You know, as mother to an adult child who I knew from birth had some major issue, and I took to so many doctors, listing the symptoms, giving them a rundown on all the ways they were different than my other children, I knew something was wrong. And yet I was ignored, I was disrespected, and most importantly, my child was not taken care of until, I insisted, until I went to a much larger city, until I was an advocate for my child and got a specialist to look at her, walked in with a diagnosis. I already knew what the issue was by the time I finally had her seen. And yes, that is what she had. And yes, insisting on an MRI did show up the brain tumor that was in her head as a result of the neurological disorder she had that no doctor would even consider. Do I sound a little resentful? Perhaps. I've worked out most of it, and my daughter is fine now. She still has the disorder, but which is, by the way, neurofibromatosis, but her brain tumor is stable at this point in her life. But no thanks to the doctors. So I have a very healthy suspicion of not doctors per se. I mean, some of them mean very well, and in my dealings with them, I have met some of those. But as a field, medicine, would pay for those of us who are the consumers of such to be a lot more diligent in our own research. Of course, I haven't read the entire book, so maybe when I finish Natural Causes, I will have a different impression of it, and if so, I will definitely share that with you. But I feel that right now, the main gist I'm getting from this book is, why are we so obsessed with not aging? That's a normal thing, and we really need to give a lot more thought to how we age. Do we really want to, for instance, go through with these very life-altering surgeries to prolong our life another year or 2 or 3, if they even do that? And how do we want to age and die? It sort of ties into, on one level, another book I want to read, nonfiction, which is Being Mortal. I've heard a lot about that book and about the end of life, approaching it, and how we want to die. And that is something that I know I want to read soon. So, going on the list. One thing I love about reading nonfiction is that you are almost for sure going to find other books that you want to read that are referenced in the books you're reading. I know that both Pathogenesis and Natural Causes have already got me making a list 7 or 8 books long that I want to read in the future. You know, they reference them and it gets my curiosity up, and I want to go investigate what the other authors have to say about this topic or maybe a tangential topic. Now, I have several other books left on my nonfiction list to read in November. We'll see how many I get to. The next one up is The Possibility of Life, Science, Imagination, and Our Quest for Kinship in the Cosmos by Jamie Green. This is a shorter book. It's only about 250 pages, and I think it's going to be the type of narrative nonfiction that I really love. Not quite as densely packed as Pathogenesis, but really intriguing. And yeah, I will hopefully have something to tell you about that one next time I come back with a reading update. And if I manage to get through it, I'm going to start The Woman They Could Not Silence. So are you participating in Nonfiction November? How is it going for you? Or even if you're not, what is the best nonfiction book you have ever read up to this point? I don't even know if I can answer that question. Okay, well, what are some of your favorite nonfiction books? Let me know in the comments below. I have really enjoyed so far watching other people's Nonfiction November reading updates. So many good books out there to read. That is one thing I've learned in my 1 month having a BookTube channel, is that there's so many books, and I have to have a notebook right by me whenever I watch a video now so I can keep a list of books I want to read in the future. And, you know, that's pretty exciting. I remember when I was in my 20s starting to worry that I might run out of good authors and good books to read. I find that pretty hilarious now. I know I will never run out, and that is a really comforting and exciting thought. So thanks for joining me today, and until next time, happy reading.